can see 30 years. Chundumpulus, Sonia, a boy. She's just there, we didn't get the age. Mama, we didn't have her age. This is one, she was also brutal that day. This man was also killed. This baby, she's 12 years old. And somebody will say it's not a genocide. And if they want facts found that Remo Amokri, let him come to Plateau. I will take him to their grave to prove to him there's genocide in Nigeria. And if Nigerian government will bow down, mellow down, and accept their guilt and say, yes, there's genocide of Christians, they should not generalize it. If they say Muslims are also killed, by who? By Muslims. Why didn't the Muslim cry out? Let them cry out that their people are being killed. But they can't do it. Because they are attacking each other based on their belief in Quran. They are divided. The Muslim in Southwest, South, they are far better. They are very intelligent. They know how to worship Allah in truth. And they stand and love the Christians. They live together, but not in the north. Because of fanatical training that they receive from Iran, from Afghanistan. And they are displaying. Now they want to stop the children. They can't do it. Because they have enjoyed, the children have enjoyed looting and all that.
In recent years, discussions surrounding security, communal relations, and human rights in different regions of Nigeria have grown more intense, driven not only by reports from institutions but by deeply emotional testimonies from ordinary citizens who describe experiences that have profoundly shaped their communities. When listening to these testimonies, it becomes clear that they are rooted in trauma, fear, and a desire for recognition, even as analysts remind us of the need for balanced interpretation. As we move through this exploration, I encourage viewers to subscribe and leave thoughtful comments, because conversations like this benefit from a community that values depth, nuance, and responsible dialogue. Your engagement helps strengthen a platform dedicated to meaningful analysis. Many communities in northern Nigeria have long spoken of recurring violence attributed to a variety of armed groups with different identities and motivations. While researchers highlight a broad spectrum of contributing factors, ranging from historical grievances and economic disparities to climate pressures and the activities of extremist organizations, local witnesses often describe their experiences through a far more personal lens. They recount nights marked by fear, the suddenness of attacks, the loss of loved ones, and the emotional scars that have not fully healed. Regardless of how these events fit into the larger political and socio-economic landscape, these testimonies offer critical insight into how affected populations perceive what is happening around them. One testimony that is often referenced involves a community member pointing toward areas where they say several people were killed during violent incidents. This individual lists the names of victims, attempting to recall details while expressing the pain of uncertainty. You can see 30 years, Chondampules, Sonia a boy, she's not there, we didn't get the age. The speaker conveys both grief and frustration, emphasizing that these losses, in their view, are not isolated events but part of a pattern they interpret as systematic. International observers, however, generally caution that determining systematic intent requires comprehensive investigation beyond anecdotal accounts. Yet the raw emotion in these voices reveals how traumatic events shape local understanding of violence. Another part of the testimony mentions an older woman whose age could not be determined, described by the witness as having been also brutal that day, and a man who was allegedly killed in the same incident. The speaker then refers to a 20-year-old described symbolically as this baby, not to suggest infancy but to emphasize youth and the perceived innocence of the victims. Descriptions like this illustrate how communities translate grief into powerful narratives that attempt to communicate the magnitude of their loss. Analysts stress that such accounts must be considered carefully, contextualized within verified evidence and cross-regional data to avoid misleading generalizations. The witness then adds, somebody will say it's not a genocide, expressing frustration that observers sometimes dispute the terminology locals use. While communities may use the word genocide to describe their emotional experience of violence, international institutions apply the term based on strict legal criteria involving intent, scale, and identifiable targeting patterns. A community's urgent need for recognition of suffering may collide with the slower, methodical nature of global investigative processes, creating tension between perception and institutional language. As you follow along, feel free to comment respectfully on how emotional testimonies and formal assessments should be balanced, and remember to subscribe if you want to follow the continuation of this deep and sensitive analysis. The speaker then continues with an emotional plea: if they want facts, let them come to Plateau, I will take them to their grave to prove to them. This expression reflects grief and a desire for validation rather than literal or verified fact. It conveys the sense of isolation communities often feel when they believe their suffering has been overlooked. Witnesses want the world to acknowledge the reality they say they have lived, even as analysts emphasize that understanding the complexity of violence in Nigeria requires cross-regional comparisons, unbiased data, and a multi-layered approach. Another emotionally charged portion of the testimony claims that if Nigerian government will bow their mellow down and accept their guilt and say yes to the genocide of Christians, they should not generalize it. This reflects the speaker's dissatisfaction and personal interpretation of events, not an established or verified assessment. The Nigerian government, like many governments facing internal conflict, often asserts that violence affects multiple communities across ethnic and religious lines. Independent studies also indicate that both Muslim and Christian populations have suffered significant casualties due to various armed groups, including criminal gangs, extremist factions, and militia networks. The speaker challenges this broader view by asking, if they say Muslims are also killed, by who? By Muslims, suggesting that the local witness perceives intra-group violence as the primary explanation. However, analysts note that communities across the country, Muslim and Christian, have publicly mourned victims from attacks carried out by a range of actors, including extremist groups and criminal organizations. The testimony reflects a localized perspective that may not capture the full national complexity of the crisis. The witness further draws regional distinctions, praising Muslims in the southwest and south-south for what they describe as peaceful coexistence with Christians, stating that such communities stand and love their Christians, and know how to worship Allah in truth. While positive in tone, this statement still represents a subjective generalization. Religious coexistence varies widely in Nigeria, shaped by historical, cultural, and political factors, and cannot be neatly divided by geography alone. Another part of the testimony claims that northern youth are influenced by fanatical training from Iran, from Afghanistan, a statement that reflects local fears rather than verified institutional assessments. International security experts generally attribute radicalization in Nigeria to domestic extremist organizations, socio-economic vulnerability, and exposure to global digital propaganda, rather than direct formal training from foreign governments. Nevertheless, the testimony illustrates how global geopolitical narratives influence local perceptions of violence. The witness concludes this emotional sequence by asserting that extremists want to stop the children, but will fail because the children have enjoyed looting and other things. This again reflects frustration mixed with moral judgment and a sense of hopelessness. Analysts, however, point out that young people caught in conflict areas often face recruitment pressures from armed groups due to poverty, lack of education, or coercion. These structural realities can manifest in ways that communities interpret emotionally but which require broader policy-based solutions. As we reflect on these narratives, it becomes clear that understanding Nigeria's security challenges requires acknowledging the emotional truth of community testimonies while grounding interpretations in verified research. Violence in Nigeria is driven by overlapping factors: farmer-herder tensions, climate change, economic pressures, religious extremism, political grievances, and criminality, all of which intersect. To stay engaged with this balanced style of analysis, I encourage you again to subscribe, comment, and share your perspectives, as thoughtful engagement helps sustain conversations rooted in responsibility, empathy, and factual awareness. The witness also mentions international organizations such as the United Nations, NATO, WHO, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and others, calling for their intervention. This illustrates the depth of the community's desire for international attention. While some of these organizations focus on human rights and crisis monitoring, others, like WHO, have mandates unrelated to security. Yet the fact that they are mentioned demonstrates the community's sense of urgency and the belief that global acknowledgement might bring relief or protection. These testimonies represent more than isolated stories; they reflect broader feelings of abandonment, fear, and uncertainty. And as we transition into part 2, which you can request at any time, your engagement continues to matter. Subscribing ensures you don't miss the continuation of this multi-layered analysis, commenting helps broaden perspectives, and sharing this content supports responsible dialogue about issues that affect millions of lives.